Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today's presentation. I am so appreciative that you are all here giving up a Sunday to join us for a really important discussion. We have not just a lively, but a very in-depth conversation and information to share with you about the state of play regarding the Abortion Access Act, the campaign, and we also get to hear from those who've been there, done it, and made it happen, which is our league in Ohio. So I am very, very, very excited to have our panelists here, our leaders at the league who are running the field team for the league. And I am particularly excited to be here. We had about 80 people register for that event. So if any one of them is a friend and you don't think they're on the call, text them and make sure they join us right now. My name is Penny Sharon. I am the League of Women Voters of Arizona president-elect. I served as the president last year, and I will be serving again as the president next year. I'm also the state advocacy chair. On this call with me, on this presentation with me, is Alexis Lane and Janet Kirby. Alexis and Janet are league members, and they also lead the issue team, the advocacy issue team for women's rights. They are our point persons for all matters related to the AAA campaign, and you will hear quite a bit from them once we hear the subject matter experts. Our panelists this evening, Jodi Liggett, Julie Gunnigle, and Elisabeth Warner, and I will introduce them individually once I explain the program and what to expect this afternoon. We are in a webinar, not a Zoom meeting. So therefore, we would like you not to post questions in the chat because they're likely not going to get answered. We would like you to post questions using the Q&A. Comments that you make that are partisan will not be shared. And in general, your comments may or may not be shared unless relevant to the topic and the content being presented. What you learn here, we hope you will share. And more importantly, we hope you will be energized and mobilized to help us get that 750,000 signature mark that we are working hard to get to. I would like to give you an overview of the league support for the AAA campaign, and then I'll jump into the league contacts. I'll introduce the panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to them because I'm really eager, as are you, to hear from them. We're going to ask you to, if you have questions that need to be answered after each panelist, Janet, Alexis, or will determine if it requires a verbal answer or we wait to answer it till the very end. Time is our constraint. So we want to be mindful of making sure we give enough information, yet enable relevant questions. The wrap-up is most important because that's how you can get involved. That's how you find out where the campaign's at. And that's also how you find out as a league member how you're going to make a difference. So do not jump off the call once our marvelous panelists are done because they're just the start. The real work is what Alexis and Janet are going to share with you. With that being said, I'd like to make sure, because we do have members of the public in today's call, the League of Women Voters of the United States and affiliated state and local leagues are proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of the government, but we're always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. The League is a political, we are political, grassroots network and all membership organization. We're an all membership organization, and in Arizona, we have 0 staff. I say that because we have our colleague from Ohio, and they do have a little bit of staff, and we're always envious of colleagues who have staff. Yes, notice I didn't say a large staff, okay? And we are an organization believe that the freedom to vote is a nonpartisan issue. We also believe this whole issue of reproductive rights is intimately tied to the most fundamental right of all, which is voting rights. For more than a century, we work to empower voters and defend democracy. Our mission is defending democracy and empowering voters. The League of Women of Arizona was established in 1941. We got the experience, we got the receipts, we helped pass 4 incredible ballot initiatives in this state. If you like the Independent Redistricting Commission, thank the League for staying in that battle. If you like the Clean Elections Commission, thank the League for pitching that fight. If you like the Judicial Review Board, thank the League for having the gumption to bring a ballot initiative to the voters. And if you care about removing dark money, note that the League was involved in the first version of the campaign, the second version, the third version, and fourth version. We got it across the finish line. The League has a long history in Arizona. The Arizona state gives us something so unique many states don't, and that's the right for direct democracy through citizens to enact laws. And the League has wielded that right as frequently as it can for the betterment of our communities. So I am delighted that we're joining this campaign. The way we decide as the State League to determine whether we will support a campaign or not, whether we will support a ballot initiative or not, is based on the public policy positions that the League has either at the state level or at the national level. And you can read about the League public policy positions through something called Impact on Issues that is available at the National League website. In addition to that, in 2022, the day the Dodd decision came down, we were in Denver at the convention. And at the convention, a resolution was adopted by the members of the League. And I shall read this to you because it was a very important resolution. It was on that day. Be it resolved that the LWV supports the rights of women and those who can become pregnant to self-determination related to and including, but not limited to, bodily autonomy, privacy, reproductive health, and lifestyle choice. So we are today here lending our name, our voice, our membership strength to this cause because we have stood firm on the rights of women, especially as it impacts their lives. With that being said, I am going to stop sharing the screen so I can spotlight in the order in which they will be presenting our panelists. The first panelist, I am going to remove the spotlight from Janet and Alexis and focus on first Jodi Liggett, who will be our first speaker. Julie Gunnigle will be our second speaker, and our third speaker will be Elisabeth Warner. Actually, I'm going to take a slight detour here in my original plan, and I'm going to bring back Elisabeth and Julie and introduce all of them because I have a feeling they're all going to interact with each other and need the introduction up front so that they can work off each other's comments as they do this. It is a pleasure to have Jodi Liggett here on this call, and hopefully the text messages she's sending are to me saying, get on with the program, Penny, okay? Jodi is a proud native Arizonan. She's a fierce women's advocate. We know this. We've worked with Jodi. She's a long-term friend of the League. She's a member of the League. She was our professional lobbyist in the last year before she decided this was more important work than going up to the Hill and giving testimony in front of some very improper gentlemen. Okay. A public policy expert, she has worked in both Republican and Democratic administrations, as well as the nonprofit and private sectors. Her career highlights, this is worth all of us paying attention to: Welfare Reform House Committee staff, policy advisor to Arizona Governor Jane D. Hull, CEO of Arizona Foundation for Women, senior policy advisor for the Phoenix mayor, now Congressman Greg Stanton, executive director for Planned Parenthood Advocates, the deputy chief of staff for the Phoenix mayor, Kate Gallego. And now she is Jodi Liggett, the powerhouse behind so many women's issues. She now runs a women's issues advocacy group, the Arizona Center for Women's Advancement. She brings to all of her work a tremendous background and training in the legal field. She has a bachelor's degree in political science and a law degree from ASU. Jodi, we are both honored and incredibly fortunate to have you both as a member and for you here to make this presentation. Jodi is an executive member of the AAA Campaign Executive Board. And so when she tells us, she's giving us the insider scoop. Julie Gunnigle, another longtime supporter of the League and a member of the League of Women Voters of Metro Phoenix. I don't agree with her on this, but this is what she said I had to say, which was she's a loudmouth attorney and activist who fights for justice in our criminal legal system. She may be loud, but she is precise and she is powerful. And for funding in our public schools and reproductive justice for all our families. She is a former prosecutor of financial crime and public corruption for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and a current co-VP of Legal Affairs for the National Council of Jewish Women, Arizona. Julie is also the co-founder of Full Spectrum Law Collective, a legal practice where she focuses on impact litigation around the criminalization of pregnancy and the war on drugs. Julie, we thank you for that really, really important work. She remains committed to transformation in our criminal legal system. And just as an aside, we go to Julie every time we want some help to understand how we might be more useful in the restorative rights movement, in the criminal justice movement. So we are very, very grateful for Julie's expertise and help on that front. And holding those, and she is good about making sure we're holding those who abuse their power accountable. So Julie, we are grateful to you. You have helped us in more than one way as the League. And we're even more grateful to, I know, the narrative you're going to give us about the future, about the history of the abortion in Arizona. I would like to now introduce Elisabeth Warner. We just met Elisabeth and we left the meeting after Gatel and I met with her saying, oh my God, we have to talk to her every week, okay? Because she has so much insight in what she does. Elisabeth comes to us as the communication coordinator for the League of Women Voters of Ohio. That's the state that won, okay? So let's, I'm so excited. She's an ardent believer in effective, thoughtful, and equitable communication is the key to vibrant civic participation. And we certainly heard that in our conversation with you. She's a proud to support the leadership in Ohio in empowering voters across Ohio and committing to strengthen our democracy by working to ensure all voices are heard. She's an advocate. She began her life as an advocate in reproductive health care, eventually becoming the advocacy director of an Ohio health center. So she has also directed initiatives with local nonprofits. If you haven't got the theme, the Women in the League brings such deep community and nonprofit work. And that's why we're not easily frightened, not easily dissuaded, and don't give up, okay? So that's what makes the difference for us, okay? She has a certificate in political communication from OU, and she's a voting rights activist for more than 2 decades, okay? You're a member of the Columbus League, not the Cincinnati League? Ah, okay, all right. That's my alma mater. So anyway, welcome, Elisabeth. You all are going to enjoy hearing from Elisabeth. Julie, I'm going to turn the spotlight on to you so that you can kick us off by giving us the history, and then it's going to be Jodi to tell us what's what, and then we'll learn lessons from Elisabeth.
All right, well, let's get into it. The love and respect for the league goes both ways. How excited am I for this panel? My family are huge Detroit Lions fans, and we are in the playoffs for the first time, I think, in my lifetime. And instead, I'm here with you because I'm just so excited to hear what everybody has to say. So for those who don't know me, hello, I'm Jodi Gunnigle. I'm an attorney, so everything I say has to start with this disclaimer that I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. The things that I will tell you this afternoon can change on an hourly or daily basis, because a lot of what I'm going to tell you about has to do with actions that are working our way through the courts. This program is valid in Arizona only. Ask your doctor if a better legislature or county attorney is right for you. The side effects of this program may include rage-induced nausea, righteous indignation, and a justified disillusionment with our judicial system. Also, the other thing that you'll want to know about this presentation is that I do not speak for the initiative campaign. So if I say something foolish, it's a Julie original. If it's brilliant, I'm sure it's something that I overheard Jodi say. Now, the other bit about what I'm going to talk with you about today is that this is for the intellectually curious. This is for the folks who really want to understand how we got to this place and why the initiative is crafted the way it is and what we have to do next. This is not what you're going to be telling folks when you are asking for a signature, because that would be a 20-minute transaction every single time. So let me first hit you with the history of abortion law in Arizona. What you'd want to know is that when we got to Dobbs and saw Roe v. Wade overturned, please know that that was very intentional, and it was the result of decades of the anti-abortion movement organizing in electoral spaces. And we've seen this at home in Arizona because since 2009, there have only been 2 legislative sessions that have passed where we haven't seen some sort of curtailing of abortion rights. So in 2009, it kicked off. We had our so-called partial birth abortion ban, and in that same year, a scope of practice ban. The next year, we saw the health insurance exchange ban. The next year, we saw the telehealth medicine ban. In 2011, we saw the trap law enforcement ban. In 2014, we saw the Born Alive ban. In 2015, we saw admitting privileges ban. In 2016, we saw an abortion reversal law passed, and so on and so forth. And if you're thinking to yourself, abortions can't be reversed, you are correct. And that is not a medically accurate law, but that does not stop the Arizona legislature from passing and a governor potentially signing these bad laws. And everything you just heard about, there's only the ones that made it across the finish line. 3 legislative sessions ago, we saw a bill introduced that would have created the death penalty for anyone who seeks an abortion in Arizona.
Julie, if I might interrupt, there seems to be some kind of interference in your speaker. Am I just hearing it, or are you all seeing that, hearing that?
How is it any better now?
Oh my God, it's fantastic. Thank you so much, Julie. What you have to say is so critical. We need to hear you clearly. Thank you.
Man, sometimes those earbuds make me sound like an alien. I'm sorry, y'all. I will also put the link to everything that I said inside the in the chat when we're done, so that you can have access to all of the citations and extra materials. So I guess pop quiz, taking it from Arizona to a national front. Where in our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, can we find the word abortion? And this is the interactive portion of the event. Where can we find it? Do I even get a Q&A? Oh.
Yeah, we don't have a poll set up, but they can put their answers in the chat.
The chat is popping. Exactly. Nowhere in the United States Constitution do we find the word abortion. Where in the United States Constitution can we find the words right to privacy? Nowhere. That's right. Nowhere can we find those words. What we can find is eventually the court got around to finding that there was a right to privacy derived from the 14th Amendment, but the way we got there was odd and convoluted. So it started with a case called Griswold v. Connecticut, which was about providers who were giving birth control in violation of Connecticut law, and were facing a $50 fine for providing those contraceptives. That case, Griswold v. Connecticut, gets appealed all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, where a panel of all male judges says, we agree, this is not a constitutional law, but fundamentally disagreed as to why. You saw a justice say that potentially it's a violation of the First Amendment and your freedom of association. My personal favorite, a theory that maybe it violates the Third Amendment and your freedom to be free from quartering soldiers. We also saw a Fourth Amendment rationale. Maybe it's derived as part of our rights to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. Another justice said that maybe it's part of our Ninth Amendment reserved rights. And then last, this idea that maybe the 14th Amendment provides, and its due process clause, provides protection from these sorts of prosecutions. So we saw that case come down in 1965, and almost immediately these sorts of actions took fire in the states. So let's turn now then to our Arizona Constitution. And I'll ask you the same questions, pop off in the chat. Where can we find the words abortion in our Arizona Constitution? Yay, nowhere. Michelle wins, thank you. Same question, where can we find the words right to privacy in our Arizona Constitution? Question mark, question mark. I love this question because this is, in fact, a trick question. We do have it in our Arizona Constitution. The Arizona Constitution is a fundamentally progressive document. And in Article 2, Section 8, we have an explicit provision that says the right to privacy. And it says that no person shall be disturbed in his, sorry, something in my throat, private affairs or his home invaded without authority of law. So what ended up happening as a result of Griswold v. Connecticut, Arizona advocates decided to take our right to privacy provision to the courts and say, maybe this right to privacy provision is in direct conflict with all of these other abortion bans that we have in our state. And that case worked its way up all the way to the Arizona Supreme Court. And in a case called Nelson v. Planned Parenthood, which came down in 1973, the court said that even though we have these rights in our Constitution, that we can equally enforce our very, very old pre-statehood bans on abortion. And that came down in early 1973. And then, of course, if you know your history, summer changed everything, because in the summer of 73, we saw Roe v. Wade. And the United States Supreme Court held in Roe v. Wade that there is a right to an abortion. And they created what we've talked about for a while as the Roe framework. The Roe framework says in that first trimester, there can be no state regulation. In that second trimester, the state can impose regulations, but they have to be reasonably related to maternal health. And then in the third trimester, they use this idea of viability, that a state may regulate abortions or ban them completely, so long as there are exceptions for the health and life of the mother. So in the bonus, I'm going to put my bonus materials in the chat for y'all. One of the things that I've linked out to is the podcast. This almost never happens in law, that Supreme Court clerks share how certain decisions were arrived at. The Supreme Court clerk who wrote the Roe opinion, or at least the first draft, ended up going on a podcast about a year and a half ago and described how we got the word viability, how this framework was created, and how a lawyer basically spending his weekend in the University of Michigan Medical Library got us the opinion that became Roe v. Wade. And Roe v. Wade, of course, was the law of the land until 1992, where we see a case called Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Again, interactive portion of the panel, y'all. I'm going to need your help. So in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, we saw Pennsylvania law did 3 things. It created first informed consent and a 24-hour waiting period prior to obtaining an abortion. It created a parental consent for minors, basically that judicial permission slip that if you were under 18, you had to see a judge to get approval for having an abortion. And then last, it said that a married woman seeking an abortion needed to notify her husband and get his permission as well. And so first, the Supreme Court comes back and says, well, we're going to look differently about these cases than the way we looked at them when we were deciding Roe v. Wade. So when we said no regulations, what we really meant was no undue burdens. And an undue burden is a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion before the fetus attains viability. So let's just do a little poll. Go ahead in the chat, and I don't know, give me a 1 if you think that at a minimum, informed consent and a 24-hour waiting period is an undue burden. Why don't you throw in a 2 if you think that parental consent and asking someone under the age of 18 to go tell a judge that they want an abortion and get his or her approval is an undue burden? Go ahead and throw a 2 in there if you think 2 is also an undue burden. And then last, why don't you throw a 3 in there if you think that third part of the law requiring that a married woman get her spouse's permission in order to have an abortion is an undue burden? I love this group. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so the United States Supreme Court ends up finding that only that third provision is an undue burden, requiring a married woman seeking an abortion to get that permission slip from her spouse was the only portion of that Pennsylvania law that got struck down. And so what you see after that is so entirely predictable. You see states enacting all sorts of burdens that impinge on somebody's right to obtain an abortion, and gradually chipping away at that right over and over. And the end result, because these acts were primarily aimed at 2 populations. First, they were aimed at doctors to make sure that doctors practicing had so many regulations that it was almost impossible to stay in practice. And then secondarily, these sorts of regulations did come after patients, making sure that they couldn't get access throughout their states. And in a state like Arizona, it's really easy to see the upshot of how few rural providers we have, how much demand we have for this medical procedure, and the wait lists that our clinics are facing all around the state. The other thing you'd want to know about, even when Roe was in place and was still standing, is that there were documented cases of prosecuting pregnancy, even when Roe v. Wade was the law of the land. And those looked different, but to give you just a sampling of what they sound like, I mean, it was cases like Christine Taylor. Christine was an Iowa mom. She fell down the stairs when she was pregnant with her 3rd child. When the nurse was asking her during triage whether or not she was excited about this pregnancy, she expressed some fear and some doubt. And as a result, she was held in jail for 2 days so that they could investigate whether or not she threw herself down the stairs intending to cause an abortion, or whether or not it was truly an accident. It's cases like Purvi Patel, who was the Indiana woman who had a miscarriage, and she was investigated and ended up being prosecuted because the state believed that she had induced that abortion at home. So even under Roe, we saw these sorts of cases all across the nation. We saw one right here at home where in Pima County, the Department of Child Safety prosecuted a pregnant person for exposing her fetus to a substance and prosecuted her for fetal child abuse and fetal child neglect. Ultimately struck down, but those sorts of cases were still happening. So I'm going to talk to you real briefly about the 3 sets of laws that we have right now, 2 of which are not enforced, thank goodness. But I want to highlight for you what's going on in the courts and why our fundamental rights to control our bodies that status is just so fundamentally in flux every single day. So of the first three sets, I want to talk to you about their territorial laws. So we have laws that date back to 1864, and the territorial ban, it does two main things. First, it says that anyone who provides or procures for a person an abortion has committed a felony, for which the mandatory minimum is 2 years and a max of 5 years in prison. Now, this does not provide any sort of exceptions for the health and safety of the patient. It also doesn't provide any exceptions for rape or incest. It also carries with it a little sister law that criminalizes the advertisement of abortion. And alongside that law, it criminalizes the advertisement of contraceptives. Now, these two laws have been enjoined since Roe v. Wade happened. Those are the laws that are making their way through our judicial process. And we actually had an oral argument at the Arizona Supreme Court where interveners were looking for the ability to enforce these very, very old abortion bans. For those who watched the argument and are trying to read the tea leaves, I'm not going to tell you how I think the court will rule, because I don't think anybody knows or can predict, but it was certainly a really strong oral argument on the idea that we've had so many laws since 1864 passed that allow for an abortion. The court needs to harmonize all of those laws in addition to this very old law to tell us what in fact is the law of the land. Also give a shout out here to the League of Women Voters, who did an amicus brief in that case, arguing that in 1964, women didn't have the right to vote. So this 1864 ban that the court wants, and that advocates potentially want to go back and enforce, not only do we didn't have a say in it, and it is quite old. The other organization who put it forward a powerful brief was the National Council of Jewish Women. And one of the things that we argued is that enforcing an 1864 ban is really enforcing one very narrow view of religion. And of course, in different religious faiths and different religious ideas, they have different ideas about the ability to control one's own body. So if the court were to rule a particular way, what they're really doing is enforcing one narrow view of religion on the rest of the population in Arizona. So that law is currently enjoined. We do not know when the court will rule. It is, yes, a bad sign that the Supreme Court took this up to begin with, but we anticipate probably sometime in spring or summer we'll hear from the Arizona Supreme Court on these laws. The second set of laws I want to talk to you about are the 15-week ban. Now, that's what's operational right here in Arizona right now. Our 15-week ban says that after 15 weeks, which we know is far too short for most people, some who don't even know that they are pregnant, and many who are on these incredibly long waiting lists to obtain access to the procedure. I'll also note for you that the 15-week ban does not have any exemptions for rape or incest. And the only exemption that it does have is one of the most narrow medical emergency bans in the entirety of the United States. In fact, in Arizona, the doctor needs to show that an abortion would be necessary to avert someone's death or create a serious risk of substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function. It's a really, really high bar. And as a result, what we're hearing from providers is that they're reticent to perform a procedure because they don't know how close to death their patient needs to be in order to have this sort of exemption. Nevertheless, that is, at least for now, and until we do our jobs and do this really big thing we're going to ask you to help with and get this petition over the finish line and amend the Constitution, that is the law of the land in Arizona right now. The other set of laws I want to talk to you about date from 3 legislative sessions ago. It's SB 1457. Now, this was a set of laws that came out. One of the things that the legislature did was they banned certain types of abortions that happen for fetal genetic abnormalities. Now, they won't define that well, and doctors still don't understand what that law means because it was so incredibly vague. So in coalition with doctors, with the National Organization of Women, the National Council of Jewish Women sued and got part of this law enjoined. And that case is making its way through the federal court system right now. And we don't know when that's going to be decided either. The really important thing to know about that package of laws and 1457, in addition to the fetal genetic abnormality section, is that it also creates a personhood law. And what a personhood law says is that anytime Arizona law mentions a person anytime in the law, it means a fertilized egg at any length of gestation. So it's been tempting with a law that is that ridiculous and silly to try to show folks how ridiculous it could be. Does this mean that when a pregnant person uses a car lane, the carpool lane, they're allowed to do that while they're pregnant? Does this mean that a fertilized egg has the ability to get an attorney? Does this mean that a fertilized egg is detained if you detain the pregnant patient that it is residing in? And putting away for a second all of those silly extrapolations and the logical extent of this law, there's also some really big fear, because if it means a person is a fertilized egg at any length of gestation, it also means that someone seeking an abortion or someone performing it has potentially committed felony child abuse or child neglect by performing that abortion. And it also means, because that is felony murder in the state of Arizona, that carries with it the possibility of capital punishment, the death penalty for performing an abortion. So 1457, it was a powerful move to get part of it enjoined. We're still waiting for the federal court. And I think that opinion, just the mechanics of it, will likely happen after the Arizona Supreme Court opinion. But even then, we don't know necessarily what's going to happen next. Whew. All right, I think that's all I have to say about that, which means that if you've followed along so far, and you're thinking to yourself, Julie, it sounds like this whole mess of laws and the little sliver of a right that we have right now in Arizona is held together by like some fishing wire and toothpaste and a couple of court injunctions, then yes, that is the exact point. And we don't know when or if those injunctions could fall. A slight breeze and we're back to the 1864 ban or a complete ban that comes to us through a personhood law. And that's why it is so important that we get this constitutional amendment approved. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to the incomparable Jodi Liggett to tell you why, not just the language being the greatest thing since sliced bread, but what we need to do from here to make sure that we have these rights going forward, not just for us, but for our daughters, our granddaughters, and all the annoying little children who've been running behind me throughout this presentation.
Jodi, before you get started, I pulled up the PDF. Would you like me to queue it up for presentation?
Oh no, I'm fine. I thought people might like to have some takeaways. So there's
okay. So the thing that you have only goes to hosts and us. So we've got to figure out how to get it to everybody. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Janet or Alexis, if you could help and get that posted for everybody. But I have it queued up if you need it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. No worries at all. So hi there. Wow. Against that incredibly hilarious, but in a bad way, depressing backdrop that Julie has laid for us. Yeah, I want to talk to you about the Arizona for Abortion Access Initiative, how it came together, what's in it, and kind of what we have to look at going forward. So first of all, kind of the who, what, where, when, and all of that. Who we are at Arizona for Abortion Access are Planned Parenthood, both Planned Parenthood Arizona and their federal counterparts, Reproductive Freedom for All Arizona and nationally. And you may remember Reproductive Freedom for All, who only recently changed their name as NARAL, same organization. ACLU, locally and national. Someone you may not have heard of, they're not a brand name necessarily, but they have been doing amazing work in our community for over 30 years. Affirm Sexual and Reproductive Health. They are Arizona's Title X agency, so they administer federal funds and re-grant them out to communities to provide family planning and contraceptive services. And they also raise money on the side so that they can help be a part of our legislative coalition every year and beat back the worst of the laws that Julie was talking about, right, and minimize the impact of the ones that do get through. So that's Affirm. Also, Arizona List works to elect pro-choice women up and down the ballot. Coppersmith Brockelman is our law firm, and they are not just election law experts, but specifically ballot measure experts, and they've been terrific to work with. Healthcare Rising is an organization, you may have just heard that in the atmosphere for a couple years. In the last election cycle, they helped to get the medical debt ballot initiative on the ballot and helped pass it. So they are very experienced in signature collection, and they are managing the volunteer portion of the signature collection. So that's who we are and what is it. So the Arizona for Abortion Access Act is a citizen-initiated ballot measure that will amend the state constitution to include the freedom for a person to make their own reproductive health decisions about a pregnancy, and specifically enshrine the right to abortion in our Constitution for all time. So when the Dobbs decision came down, boom, it shouldn't have been a shock, I think, to any of us, but it was still shocking that it happened. And that took away the certainty that we had, such as it existed, and really, the backstop that allowed us to, no matter what our crazy legislature was doing or what mischief the Center for Arizona Policy was up to in any given year, we could be pretty certain that there was going to be a core right, and that is gone now. And as you've heard from Julie, right, folks are very, very busy with litigation trying to wipe out that right entirely by hook or by crook. Either reviving a Civil War era law that, by the way, the League of Women Voters submitted a beautiful friend of the court brief making the point that 1864 was before women had the right to vote. So they literally made a law about us without us on abortion specifically. And I thought the League was such a powerful messenger for that. And I know that's going to have an impact. So whether it's an 1864 law or some crazy legal concept of personhood that gets pioneered here, as John Stewart says, we are the meth lab of democracy in Arizona, not just on reproductive rights, but kind of especially on reproductive rights. So I'm talking. That's one of the things that played into the coalition's decision to go for a constitutional amendment, as opposed to a ballot measure that would just enact a statute. There's too much mischief that can happen. We all only want to do this once, and we want to enshrine this right for ourselves, our sisters, our daughters, for all time, right? I know that's what we all want to do. So when we were drafting this initiative, I just described the first fork in the road we got to, statutory or constitutional. And that was initially not as easy of a call as you would think. The difference in the number of signatures that you have to gather and kind of the legal scrutiny or the avenues of attack are really different. A constitutional amendment is much harder, but I'll let you in on our I think we've got a great group of people with high ideals, and never forget that ballot measures are legislation. So the same kind of element of sausage making that goes into laws that come out of the legislature goes into, proposals that make their way to the ballot. People have to compromise or do things that are harder than they think that they're going to be. And we just had to realize that no institutional investor, no high net worth kind of the national donors that you think of that fund these initiatives across the states, nobody was going to be interested in a mere statutory change. They want to do something lasting and permanent. So that was a reality that we took into account as we made that decision. And then with regard to a constitutional amendment, first of all, Arizona has a single subject requirement. So you may recall there was a much more expansive measure that people tried, on the ground to quickly pass right when that Dobbs decision came down, striking down Roe. There were a number of women. It started in Southern Arizona, in Tucson, tried to put a measure on the ballot. Very heroic. According to them, they got over 175,000 signatures, like in a 3-month window. Upon review, though, that measure, which they had no prayer of passing, but I understand that people wanted to do something. At any rate, that measure was a more expansive right. I think people really like this, that would have included things about birth control and other stuff. Unfortunately, that would have been very, very vulnerable to attack because of our single subject requirement. So that's why our initiative only talks about abortion and just the right to abortion. That's all that it deals with. And that is, because of Arizona's requirements. So the next fork in the road we faced, and in the reproductive health rights and justice movement, it's a big tent. There are a range of viewpoints. There are movement people who do advocacy all the time and don't have to make the dirty compromises that those of us who work at the legislature have to do. And so there's a tension. And there's a tension for a very good reason. What I'm about to talk about is the inclusion of a viability standard in this measure. A reference to, pre-viability, there's an unrestricted right. And then post-viability, there are some caveats, there are some restrictions on the right. In our measure, it's a light touch. They're extremely reasonable. And most importantly, we keep these decisions between patients and doctors. We're not using a one-size-fits-all approach where we're talking about weeks or anything like that. This is viability as determined by a medical professional. That is a big pill to swallow. Including a viability standard is really hard for folks in our movement to accept, because that is saying that government has a role in any of this, in any of our reproductive rights and health decisions. And I know, in a pure sense, we don't want to allow that. However, we have to use our data, use our common sense, and most importantly, talk to Arizona voters and understand what they are willing to support. And so that's what we did. We took 2 options before Arizona voters in 2 very robust rounds of polling, oversampling in communities of color, so we would be sure to capture those really important voices and viewpoints. And Arizona voters are not willing, at least, more than 51% of Arizona's voters are not willing to support a measure that includes, that does not include a reference to viability. We could probably fight that public understanding, battle, but we would need a couple of years to educate the public so they would understand why. And we don't have that time, so we have to, face facts and work with the electorate that we have. And I think all of us in the coalition are very comfortable with where we wound up, because where we wound up was a measure that does include a viability standard. It has an unrestricted right up to that point. The restrictions post-viability are for the life of the pregnant person, if it's in jeopardy at all. And that is according to a medical professional, not according to some, statutory listing of conditions. Number 2, the health of the pregnant person, if that is in jeopardy at all, again, as determined by their medical professional. And that includes mental health. So if you're dealing with a 14-year-old rape victim who is suicidal at the prospect of continuing a pregnancy with her rapist child, that is going to qualify. She doesn't have to prove that she'll die if she carries this pregnancy to term, which is the situation we're in now. So I think we've come up with a framework that really works, and that language, that very language, stays above the 52 to 57% kind of magic number in polling, where you can feel confident that that measure is going to pass. And that includes we polled people, not just in the abstract, like, look at this language, do you support this? Along with our messaging. We challenged those poll participants with what we know will be opposition messaging, like, oh, this allows abortion up until birth, right on the delivery table. You'll be able to get an abortion, which is nonsense and a myth that is spread. And we were able to sustain those levels of support, even with that opposition messaging. So we feel really confident, and I think you saw most recently our signature collection with Healthcare Rising and a number of partners, including the League of Women Voters, also National Council of Jewish Women, Planned Parenthood, Reproductive Freedom for All, in terms of volunteer signature collections. Indivisible has an informal role. They have been very active. We're doing great and meeting our monthly targets, and that, along with the paid side, most recently in the news, you will have seen that we have collected over 250,000 signatures. And the campaign has also retained a validation company in addition to the paid component. We have a separate independent company that is validating those signatures internally, so that we know when we get to June, which is our target, the deadline is July 3rd to turn in those signatures, that we will feel confident that we have more than enough valid signatures to qualify this measure for the ballot. So we've gotten language together that withstands challenging messaging and that voters will support. We are on track with an organization. We just hired our campaign manager, and we'll be hiring other professionals to collect those signatures and then run a robust yes campaign. On the validation of the signatures, we want to have that all complete, and our target is, Penny mentioned, 750,000. The legal requirement is, I think, 387,000 something. We're going after almost double that number just to be sure. It is so easy in Arizona. Our legislature does not like the fact that citizens can put things on the ballot and enact laws themselves. So they have made it really easy to challenge signature collectors themselves, to challenge the petitions themselves, and to challenge the signatures on the petitions. So we feel like we need that much of a cushion. And I'm confident that we'll have those. So I'm confident in our language. I'm confident in our signatures. I'm confident in our campaign. Here's the only thing I'm a little bit worried about. This, our guest from Ohio will tell you, these are very expensive projects to pull off, both to qualify the thing for the ballot and then to make sure that it passes. So overall, our budget is $50 million. This is an incredibly expensive project. This will be the most money I think ever raised for a ballot initiative. And it's tough sledding because everyone has jumped on the bandwagon. So we are now competing with measures in other states, whereas some of the early folks like Ohio, had a little bit friendlier environment, but I know that was not easy for them to raise at all. So that's the only thing that I'm a little bit nervous about. And I'm only expressing that by way of saying your volunteer time is so appreciated. Your advocacy with your family, friends, and neighbors is so appreciated. And we would very much appreciate your online donation or a check. And you'll see that opportunity in the PDF. It's called a donor prospectus. is a document that will repeat some of the information I've given you and even talk a little bit more about the qualification phase and then the final phase. And you'll see where you can send a physical check if that's what you do. And you can always go to ArizonaForAbortionAccess.org and just scroll down and you'll see a donation button and you can take that. And I think there's a QR code on that PDF also. So I kind of rushed through a little bit, but I want you to hear from all our guests, and I know there will be opportunity for questions later. So I'm incredibly confident. I'm really gratified and proud of what we've done so far, and the best is yet to come, and kind of the hard work starts now.
Jodi, if I could interrupt you for one moment, there are a couple of questions in the chat that maybe we could clarify now if you have a minute. The Margaret Hill and Teresa Reel have two that I thought might be valuable to address. Medication abortion, is there a distinction made that we should highlight with abortion pills versus
right, there's stuff going on nationally with the abortion medication, but in terms of the law in Arizona, an abortion is an abortion. You know, there's restrictions on telemedicine for medication abortion, but as far as this ballot measure is concerned, there's no distinction that needs to be made.
Okay, and when you talk about viability, we're talking about viability of the fetus. If you look
viability
at
of the fetus, yes. So when could a fetus survive outside the womb? And really, Julie talked about the Roe framework and how clunky it is, and how ill-advised it was. Naming a number of weeks is just not even the reality of medicine. Viability is going to vary depending on the age of the patient and the number of pregnancies that they've had before. So that's why we have to take politicians out of this equation completely, because they just don't know what they're doing, and laws are blunt, clumsy instruments. And this ballot measure returns decision-making to medical providers, doctors, and their patients, pregnant women.
On that front, Alexis, medical providers who would not qualify, would my podiatrist not qualify?
We say medical providers to provide, to open a window to hopefully legislative action in the future, perhaps litigation. We were constrained by kind of the single subject, and I'm just using that term generally, requirement of the Constitution, but we did not want to tie ourselves into medical providers. I think 2 decades ago, or maybe not that long ago, at least 15 years ago, nurse practitioners were qualified to provide abortion care, certainly medication abortion care. They're completely qualified, and several states have that within their scope of practice. So I say doctors, that's the reality of the law now. This constitutional amendment would open that up to other practitioners, but no, it would have to be in their scope of practice. And podiatrists certainly would not apply, but expect to hear that kind of nonsense from our opposition. Yeah.
Thank you, Jodi.
Yeah.
The 250 signed, that's after it's gone through the validation process, correct? Those are 250 solid, I mean, it still has to go through the SOS, but I mean,
right.
It's gone through that third-party company is what I'm asking.
Right. I would have to fact check that to be absolutely certain, but that is my understanding.
Okay. All right. I'm going to come back online just for a second, Jodi, before I turn it over to Elisabeth, who is going to speak to us from Ohio. So what I'd like to do is, I know that Julie is still Julie is on the call, so we'll bring her back. Jodi, I want to thank you a lot for, doing this heavy lift. I know you're all very busy, but I hope you'll stay on, because I think there's some valuable questions you both might want to ask Elisabeth, in addition to all of us who are working through. Yes, that'll be wonderful. So I'll take you off spotlight, and then we'll work with, we'll have Elisabeth speak about what the Ohio experience was like. So thank you again, Jodi, and thank you, Julie, for doing the heavy lift to level set for all of us. Elisabeth, you're on, and I heard wonderful explanations of how we ought to work this fight, but I hope you will share the same with everybody on this call.
Well, I hope you will indulge me. I will go through a little bit about how we got to this place, and then, yes, absolutely talk about our strategy with the League. So first, thank you for having me here today. It's such an honor to be with such impressive company. Ohio, we are a beautiful state with beautiful and brilliant citizens and a spectacularly bonkers state government. I think we might challenge the meth lab of democracy status in Ohio. I love us, but the story of Ohio's successful passage of the Reproductive Rights Amendment, I think will give you a little insight into how bonkers we are. So buckle up, this is a journey. Heading into the 2024 election, the legal status of abortion was confusing. Pregnant people did have access to abortion care until 22 weeks, but the legal status was tenuous. Ohioans had that right, but it was temporary and not settled law, because after Dobbs, Ohio had a law on the books that banned abortion after 6 weeks. And that had been passed in 2019 after years and years of trying. They'd been working on this for decades. But then after Dobbs, it was able to go into effect. The Attorney General petitioned the court to lift the injunction blocking it, and it immediately went into effect. So that was literally on the day that Dobbs fell. I'm sorry, that Roe fell. And so from June until last year, until a few months later, I'm sorry, June of 2022, until a few months later, when another judge put the 6-week ban on hold temporarily, abortion was banned in Ohio after 6 weeks. So that hold on the 6-week ban is why people could still get an abortion in Ohio until 22 weeks of pregnancy, but the state was fighting to lift the injunction and make sure that the ban became settled law. And so the order that suspended the 6-week law was appealed by the state. And at the time of the election, the Ohio Supreme Court had already heard arguments on preliminary procedural issues, and that would have they would have been likely to have been asked to rule on the merits soon after. Ohio has an extremely anti-choice legislature. We are an extremely gerrymandered state, something I know you guys know a little about, but being on the other side of it. The majority of justices on the Supreme Court are on record as being anti-choice, and all of the statewide offices are held by Republicans who are, again, actively on the record as being anti-choice. And so there's very little doubt that given the chance, the 6-week ban would have been upheld. So that's where we were when this whole started. Abortion was legal for people until 22 weeks, but that right was temporary and expected to go away at any moment. Before I dig into the Ohio general election issue one, there is another issue one that was just before that. So I need to just back up a little to give you a little context. And I don't want to take too much time with this part, but I think some immediate backstory is helpful and relevant to the big issue in the fall. So in the spring, to everyone's surprise, the Ohio legislature, who had just banned special elections, decided that they were going to have a special election, actually, because it was convenient. And so they decided to hold a special election in August before the November general election. And I'm telling you this about this unnecessary and expensive election because it was expected that a coalition of reproductive justice organizations would by then have gotten a constitutional amendment onto the 2023 ballot that would codify the right to abortion care and also other kinds of reproductive health care. So knowing that polling consistently clocked Ohio voters as being between 50 and 60% in favor of abortion access, our General Assembly, supported by the Ohio Secretary of State, put another constitutional amendment onto the ballot that was intended to preempt the Abortion Rights Amendment by requiring a supermajority to pass any constitutional amendment and some other barriers too, that just basically would have made it pretty much impossible for any citizen-led initiative to even get onto the ballot in the first place, much less win if it did actually get on. So the August election was about the civic processes for proposed constitutional amendments, a thing that I would have thought would have been so dry that no one would have cared about, but actually people were extremely engaged. And part of why they were extremely engaged was because it was widely regarded as a proxy war for abortion. So we and many other grassroots good government groups had fought against holding the election when it was still being debated in the legislature, and we were part of the coalition who worked on the No on Issue 1 campaign. By the way, both these issues were Issue 1, and one was no on one, and the other was yes on one. And so that became a complicating factor in trying to communicate these issues. So it was a whole thing. So in Ohio, we have 34 local leagues, around 2,500 members. And so we were actively mobilizing our folks for an opposition operation. And so we were one of the most visible faces in the special election campaign. So right away, because we were kind of pretty prominent in that, we started to have a lot of the disinformation about what would eventually become the abortion ballot in the general election. A lot of the disinformation started in this campaign. So because we were pretty upfront in our role in this, we had kind of a front seat role for basically the lies that would become central in the general election fight. And so we became a target of the, and again, it's complicated, of the yes on Issue 1 people. So our bylaws were leaked, our social media was full of trolls, there were statewide officials like the Secretary of State who, along with the Ohio Right to Life, had become the de facto spokesperson for the special election campaign. So they started going after us on social media. So we were able to suss pretty quickly that disinformation would be the primary weapon that would be used by groups who wanted to defeat the reproductive rights amendment in the fall. And basically they were giving their playbook on how they were planning to win. So it gets pretty ugly, but we win 57% of the vote. Pretty impressive in a very red state. So moving to the next Issue 1, which is the reproductive rights amendment. Our league decided to not take a position. And if I could tell you how controversial this was, I might need a cocktail in front of me because it was an extremely complicated and frankly painful decision. But basically our local leagues did not have consensus. There was overwhelming support on an individual level, but there was a lot of concern about what our endorsement and possible role in the November Issue 1, how that would impact our sort of influence and position moving forward, and knowing that 2024 is going to be rough, and that we needed to be able to have kind of all the credibility that our legacy with the league has brought us, particularly in our rural communities where the local leagues are kind of the last wall against some extremely anti-democratic forces. And so in the end, the decision was that we would not take a position on the amendment. As you can imagine, lots of very strong feelings, as we are a group of people who are individually extremely pro-choice most of the time, and then as an organization, we are an organization that part of our policy platform is support for reproductive health care. So this was a very hard decision. What we decided, though, was that we would have more influence and the things that we could do in a voter services orientation rather than an advocacy orientation was going to have more impact on the election. And so our main focus was on that disinformation. We felt like we could be really most valuable as fact checkers, where we could leverage the credibility that we had earned, from supporting generations of voters to counter the disinformation that had been kind of previewed in the August election. The other benefit to this for us was that we could use 501c3 funds to pay for staff time and materials. And we had just had this very unnecessary and expensive election where we were coming from an advocacy perspective. So it was important to us to be able to kind of maximize the resources that we had. And we wanted to be sure that we kind of didn't have any daylight between us and the repro campaign, that we were independent and we were leaning into things that sometimes the campaigns don't want to talk about, because sometimes campaigns want to keep things pretty high level and not indulge in the disinformation because there's a feeling that it could kind of platform it and give it more space, which is, I totally understand. But our role as voter advocates was that we wanted to be able to lean into that. We wanted to be able to counter it and diffuse it, and to give our voters and our local leagues the tools that they could do that for them. So I kind of developed a two-pronged strategy to go into the general election. So the first one was just to, the thing that all leagues do every day, which is to have voter service messaging. So the mechanics of voting. How do you request an absentee ballot? What are the, ID laws? Part of this was because also in 2023, again, we are special snowflakes in my beautiful state. Our legislature, again, with the support of the Ohio Secretary of State, passed some of the most restrictive voting laws in the country. And so we knew that voters would have more questions than ever. And the framing of this whole election, particularly after the August election, was very confusing. So we knew that voters would need additional voter service support. So we were going to do our traditional classic voter service messaging, but we were going to amplify it and we were going to be a lot louder. So that was one side of it. And the other side was to actively counter the disinformation that was coming out of issue 1. So some of that messaging was evergreen, how to spot disinformation, how to fight against it. But most of it was targeted specifically to our issue 1. And so I developed materials and content that we could use in our state league platform, so our website, our social media, and we have a pretty robust social presence. So we knew that that was going to be something that could have a lot of impact. And then also create voter materials. So, like palm cards, things we could hand out to voters and that we could give to our local leagues that they could give to voters in their communities. And so the other sort of benefit of this, the goal of this, was to empower our local leagues to use these tools in their platforms and in their voter service work. So I created a toolkit, and I'll share that with you too, that has social media assets, talking points, messaging guidelines, an FAQ, a glossary about how to talk about reproductive health care, resources for fact checking, generally, and then about issue 1 in particular, templates for letters to the editor. And we shared these with our local leagues in kind of throughout the campaign. So we had weekly newsletters, we had all member calls, and then we had a members only section of our website. And then we also did webinars that we reached out to legal and medical experts. And those webinars centered on the facts of the amendment. So as a way to push back against the main areas of disinformation. And the webinars themselves had high attendance, but they were recorded. And so we used them as content in our social channels to extend our reach. And so that way, many more thousands of voters were able to have access to that information. one thing that we did too was that we, for all the materials that I created, we had a constitutional lawyer vet them, so that we were sure and confident that everything that we were saying was right, because we knew that because we were so visible, and that everything we did was going to be extremely scrutinized and picked apart. So, you know, and Jodi referenced it earlier, you know, you guys are going to see so much disinformation, and Penny mentioned in the beginning briefly that my sort of first career was the director of advocacy for a clinic in Ohio, and so I thought I was not shockable. Turns out I am shockable, and the depths that that anti-choice people can sometimes go to are shocking, and even I, after, you know, all these many years, was shocked. And part of the power that the other side had was that they had basically institutionalized disinformation. So they had the Secretary of State, they had the Ballot Board, which I'll get to in a moment. They had all these tools at their disposal that they could introduce all this disinformation. They could confuse voters. And so we wanted to do everything that we could to counter all of that. So Jodi mentioned one of the things that you'll see is that they will say that pregnancy termination can come at any time, and that post-viability terminations will be the claim. You'll also hear a lot about parental consent. So I think you guys have parental consent laws in Arizona too. The amendment that we did pass is very, very similar, almost word by word to the amendment that you all have. And so because it doesn't specify adults and it says individual, that opened the door for people to say, oh, well, that means that anybody, any 12-year-old can have an abortion any Tuesday of the week. And then it also devolved even further to talk about all parental consent. So not just about reproductive health care, but having your tonsils taken out or anything. And then it also specifically devolved into gender affirming care. So those were the three issues that we saw the most, and that's what we actively worked to counter. So that would be my little, like, just be ready for that one. And so lessons learned, I would say, there's so many. I would say consistent messaging that centers voters and that talks about how you want to provide information so that voters can make the decisions that fit with their values, and to be clear and specific about the facts that you are providing. And again, because we were not coming at this from an advocacy point of view, we were not officially endorsing the campaign. We wanted to try to present all of this without commentary when possible, which FYI, really challenging. So we also wanted to be sure that some of the voices saying these things were coming not from us, but from the medical and legal experts who we knew would have a lot of credibility. And then we also just wanted to use all the possible comms tools that we had available. So social media, websites, physical collateral that we could give, communicating to our members. Our members and our local leagues were incredibly valuable, crucial to all of this. And so the other thing was to just communicate frequently with local leagues and then try to facilitate collaboration between local leagues as much as possible to amplify their power there. I feel like I've been talking for 5 hours. So I'm going to stop and we can talk about anything else. Any questions that folks have had? I should look at the chat. Anybody have any immediate questions?
I'm going to add a couple of things to Elisabeth's comments about the role of the league. The league in Arizona, we had some robust discussion about the role we would take, and for all of the members, both league members and non-league members, as advocacy chairs and our lead issue teams, we felt very strongly about supporting this initiative, even though we know we have members who were really, not that they were against us supporting, but were nervous about their impact in their leagues. I mean, it is a little dicey, but we stood strong. We're supporting it. That's one comment. The other comment I want to also make is, you know, Elisabeth talked about sharing materials. Actually, she's going to just share the materials with us at the state, and we're going to determine in coordination with the campaign, Alexis and Janet, what's appropriate for us to actually deploy. For local leagues, we don't want our messaging has to be consistent across the state. And
Absolutely.
so we want to be careful about that. The other thing that Elisabeth said when Gatella and I met with her, and I share this with you all because it's important, and that is, now's not the time to fight the disinformation battle, except informally through getting the signatures. Our focus needs to be on the signatures. She said, keep your powder dry and have all that ready to go as soon as it gets on the ballot. So I say this to you all. So all of you who want to write and say, Penny, why don't we have the disinformation campaign? Because Elisabeth, I think, is wise. Jodi, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to put the spotlight on both of you so you both can join this conversation, because now we need to segue into, where are you? There you are. Okay, there you are. And where are you, Julie? There you are. Okay. All right. So the three powerful women and all the side assistants here. Janet, I'm putting the spotlight on you, okay? Alexis, I'm putting the spotlight on you. So as a team, we can make sure we are all giving the, having this conversation together. And then Janet and Alexis, you will have the program to tell us what's what and what we need to do next. Jodi, I have a question for you. I want to piggyback on what Elisabeth told us, which is hold your powder dry, till it gets on the ballot. What do you think about that?
I agree with that completely. Right. We don't need to be on our opposition's timetable. They want to start talking about this stuff. So you will notice in general, ballot measures don't like to publicly talk about the number of signatures. They usually keep that close to the vest. One of the reasons that we came out with that figure was that day or the day before, Center for Arizona Policy, which is our major opposition group here and responsible for the 40+ restrictions that Julie painstakingly went through with you all, none of which are in any way related to medicine. It's not like we had the AMA down at the legislature fighting for this. It's an interest group with a social agenda. Anyway, they came out with their website that they unveiled called It Goes Too Far. And that's, the theme that they will stick to, which is, abortion until birth, or, 6-year-olds can consent to whatever. We have parental consent laws in Arizona. There's nothing in this measure that automatically repeals those laws. So that is just mythology, but we do not want to get into this back and forth. So we put out our own press release saying, oh, hey, just by the by, we're at the 250,000 signature mark. And it really did occupy the space and kind of push that other headline or that other news out of the headlines. I did a social media post, but I felt like it encapsulated our response, which is la la la, can't hear you, too busy counting our signatures, right? That's where we want to be right now. We will fight those fights. We'll combat disinformation, but only when we're, in the thick of the campaign and we have data coming back to us showing that they are somehow moving the needle with that nonsense. Otherwise, it's talk to the hand.
So Jodi, in Ohio's case, what I can't remember, Elisabeth, if you told us or not, but I believe the campaign actually asked them not to have too much of a visible because of the power of their neutrality, so to speak, in order to fight mis and disinformation. Did I hear that correctly, Elisabeth? You want to
Yeah,
just comment on that?
there were conversations about that, and you know, the coalition that was the Repro Coalition was we had kind of two different groups heading into that. So we had kind of the traditional, the NARAL, which is now Pro-Choice Ohio, and in Ohio, and we had, you know, Planned Parenthood and ACLU, and then we had a new group who was the Physicians for Reproductive Healthcare. So those were kind of distinct groups, and then they married and became one, and yeah, I mean, the thinking was that we would have more value to everybody as fact checkers and not as part of the coalition. So, you know, much discussion again, but that was in our case what was decided would be most helpful, most beneficial.
And I bring this up, Jodi, because you made a comment to me in the chat, and I want to reassure our members who are on this call, we believe we made what was appropriate for us in Arizona. So you want to speak to that? And also the question that is on the table is if Elisabeth can comment on the difference between the coalition in Ohio and the coalition in Arizona. So Jodi, you go first, and then Elisabeth, please.
Sure. Now we had some of those traditional divisions. I personally, and I know this is an opinion shared by everyone in the campaign group, having the league as a member of our volunteer signature collection team is a very powerful statement. It has been incredibly helpful. But I do understand differentiating your messengers and having, you know, like the traditional repro folks, you know, talking to their people. But then it's almost like, you know, what do we know about bullying, right? We know that the best folks to take on a bully is not, you know, the folks necessarily who are being attacked, but bystanders. So we're having an internal conversation right now, I'll tell you, about whether the obstetricians and gynecologists, you know, belong inside in our campaign group, or whether they should remain kind of outside and can be those third-party validators and the punch back messengers who aren't perceived as, oh, you're part of the campaign, of course you're going to say that, right? They're incredibly popular. If we had a nurses association in Arizona that we could use to be third-party validators, that's a steeper hill to climb. But yeah, that principle is very sound. I think the groups that are, you know, in one camp or another, or, you know, deploying themselves in one way or another can vary according to the state. I think what the league has done here in Arizona was absolutely right for Arizona, so that this effort was not perceived as some little, you know, over here in our pink corner with Planned Parenthood doing something weird, that it was, no, this is a groundswell of women of all ages all over the state want this. And not just women, but, you know, that's the bread and butter of the campaign. It was a really long answer, but
no, but it's important for us to understand that. Elisabeth, you want to comment on the difference between the two coalitions? And then I'm going to move on to some other questions at the table. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty similar. It sounds like the big difference is the doctors, that you know, there was a very specific, I mean, that is really who pushed it for the timing, because there was also much discussion about when the amendment should happen. And so many people felt that it should be for the 2024 ballot. And again, arguments good and bad on all the sides. But so I think that's the big difference, is that, you know, all the regular players you would expect were there, but they were joined by this physicians group who ended up having really a lot of strength and support.
I have two questions, and in the interest of time, I do need to give some time to Alexis and Janet because they have an important message to share too. One is how much money have we raised, and You know, it's never enough. And we know that, Jodi, if you have a number, great. If not, don't worry about it. You know, we'll get an answer, and it's okay. It's a question at the table. And the one, and why is this? Will they? Okay, so we have a question about signatures and some rule, you know, about signatures bleeding, and I suggest that the individual asking that question just email us, and then we can answer that. Alexis and Janet, if you will put your emails in the chat for everyone, they can reach out to you directly. Okay. I'm going to segue our three main speakers, please don't leave, so we have a chance to close it out. Alexis, Janet, you're on next. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, so very much. I'll give it a start and hand it over to Janet. You've set the stage so beautifully for all of the many reasons that we're doing what we're doing now. And I'm so happy to be part of the league so that I can channel my frustration and energy into making a difference. So last summer, I think, is when Janet, Penny, Gattell, and a few of us started trying to figure out how to put together a statewide effort so that we could do our best and make sure that our energy was effective and efficient toward this initiative. So Jodi keeping us in the loop of when it would be ready to pull the trigger. We had that timeline sort of that we were working toward. So starting in September, we joined with the other folks who are part of the grassroots coalition that Jodi mentioned earlier, ACLU and Planned Parenthood and Arizona List, which is I guess our state chapter of Emily's List, if you're familiar with that organization, and a bunch of other really organized and passionate folks. So we joined with their statewide effort to set up a grassroots network across the state so that folks could help train and become signature gatherers. So that's what Janet and I are doing for the league. We've got hubs and depots around the state. I noticed some of the names on our chat are some of the people that we're working with already. I think, Janet, we have 40 volunteers league-wide so far. Our goal is 100 for our next big push. So if anyone on this call hasn't signed up yet to be a volunteer, you can go to the LWVMetroPhoenix.org website, and there's a link under Protect Abortion Access in Arizona. There's the email address, there's Janet's email address in the chat. There's also a form that you can click on to sign up, and we'll help get you organized.
Which I just posted to the chat. Sorry, I just posted it to the chat. Yeah.
Good, easy access. So we've got Emily and her folks in Tucson. I see you're on the call, and I saw Michelle and some other folks from Northern Arizona on the call, but we need more. We need more. I think so far we have, if Janet again is the numbers person, but I think we maybe have 1,000 league collected signatures so far, and our goal is 10,000. So we need help doing our part so that we can make sure that this chance that we have, that we don't let it pass us by. Like, all the stars are aligned, and a lot of us have been really mad and anxious and upset for months, years, however long. And now's the time to put all of your energy into it, because we've got it. I'm always an optimist, but seeing all of you on the screen too, I think we're in striking distance. We have everything we need to get it done. So any energy that you have that you're ready to give our way, we want to make sure that your energy is put to good use and your time's being honored. And I think we can make a difference. What else, Janet?
Yeah, sure. So in the link that I put in the chat, or if you were to go to the website and find it, you sign up to be a volunteer, then we will follow up with you with more materials. We're not going to leave you hanging per se. So there is training. So we'll have trainings and some tips on training on how to collect signatures, more training about the coalition and the ballot measure, and tips on what to do and not do when you're collecting signatures. We also have a bi-weekly meeting. It's Mondays at 12:30, where you can sign up to participate in the meeting, where we can brainstorm ways to go out and collect signatures, hear from others on what they're doing, or collaborate with somebody else who lives in your area to maybe go somewhere and host a meeting. There's a website on there's a Mobilize site where you can find out where there are signature collection activities. We can help hook you up with notaries because that's another part of the process. So we have all sorts of resources to help you get activated and engaged. What else?
That sounds great. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that it's a lofty goal. And as Jodi mentioned, we've collected 250,000 total. That's the paid circulators as well as the volunteers. Since we started in October, just the volunteers, people like us going out there, the goal has been 10,000 signatures a month. And we have been meeting and exceeding that goal every month. In January, went from 10,000 to 20,000. And of course, when we all start, we know who the people that we're getting first. So maybe it seems like those first 10,000 per month are a little bit easier, but as we continue to grow this grassroots network, we all can get those low-hanging fruits. Each signature, each petition page has 15 signatures on it. So if you can think of 15 people to reach out to send a text message to ask whether they've signed or not, you can, it's that easy. We can train you, we can get you a petition and a clipboard, and you can get those signatures. If you're really good, you can be part of the 50 club. We have some 50 club members on the call today. Candace Englert and Rivko are the ones that I recognize right off of the bat, the star gatherers. So those are, we have a few people who've collected 60, 75 signatures that are just going gangbusters. But if we have 100 people collecting 100 signatures, or do the math any way you slice it and dice it, we can get there. We just need everyone to help. And I know that everyone wants to, and you can, we'll help you.
Yep.
Oh,
There's
450,
a
somebody collected
comment on the
450.
chat, but we just want to clarify, we have non-league members here, and the numbers we're reporting are primarily the league. We have no knowledge of what non-league members are doing.
Yeah.
So if you're collecting a lot of signatures, yay, good for you. Keep at it, okay? Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, send me an email with all your tips.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
the
as
one thing-
Elisabeth, no, I was just gonna say, as Elisabeth pointed out, there's great value in volunteer collected signatures. Our validity rate is significantly higher than a paid volunteer. It's a lot cheaper for us to collect signatures. And there's something legal about it. We can't be subpoenaed. Jodi, you have to jump in. There's okay, that's what it is. Yes, go ahead, Penny.
Yes, paid, again, I mentioned before, like our legislature just, they hate that we can make laws. So they made it very easy to attack. And one of the avenues of attack is for paid signature collectors, they can be subpoenaed after the fact. That's why it's gotten so expensive, because we have to have people where like we know where they are and can go get them months and months after the fact if we need to haul them into court or get them in a deposition. Volunteers, no, you're untouchable. So not only will you not be hauled into court, that means those volunteer signatures are like gold, like not even gold, like that's real money. If we don't have to pay to defend and pay for the signature itself, that is as if you're donating cash to the campaign. So thank you.
Jodi, one point that I want to bring up and piggyback on Alexis that everybody should be aware of. The time is now. This may be our last chance because there are ballot initiatives that essentially will restrict our ability to bring forward ballot initiatives. And these are referrals from the legislature. Folks, we got to get it done now. It's a do or die for us, okay, literally, okay? And so I urge you all, you know, if you are not, if you've signed it and you think that's enough, no, sorry, it's not enough. It's really not. So league members on the call, we have to make that 10,000, okay? So if you think, well, I got one page, well, now find your cousin, sister, whoever, and tell them to go get a page, okay? And so please, Jodi, I want you to remind all of us that, you know, this is a do or die. It's this time or not, okay?
And
Yeah.
keep in mind, this is a bipartisan issue, so don't be afraid to reach out to people who don't necessarily vote the way you do, because they may be completely different on the situation. And I have found that to be the case within my personal friends as well. It doesn't really matter that they vote for the other side, or whatever you want to call it. They are very much pro-choice.
Yeah, there's speaking as a former, there are plenty of Republicans. Jane Hall, my old boss, was one of them, who just didn't like government in their private life and said, get out. And those are your friends and neighbors. Don't be afraid. If they don't want to sign, just move on, but you would be surprised. A lot of women, and a lot of women my age and older, who are just devastated that I have a 30-year-old daughter and she has fewer rights than I did at her age. I'm just crushed, and I have to fix that.
And just to give it a quick overview, I know we gave everybody a lot of information all at once, but just the nuts and bolts of it are, feel free to reach out to either Janet or me if you want to get involved, and we can hold your hand. Alternatively, go to the LWV Metro Phoenix website, where you can click on a Google form. Once you'll see Protect Arizona Abortion Access, and sign up there. And then again, we'll contact you and get you everything that you need. And we also have another tool that Janet mentioned. If you have already gotten your friends and family and you want to host an event, I go to a coffee shop every Tuesday morning from 8:30 to 10:30 with my friend who happens to be a notary. And I just work from the coffee shop. And I post that event on this grassroots site that we have, this tool. And anybody who wants to sign the petition can meet me at the coffee shop and do it. So that's something that we need more people to do. If you have availability, if you have that time in your schedule, you can sign up for that as well, and we can help you do that. So there are lots of different ways to get involved, but reaching out to your friends and family to make sure they know this is happening, first of all, and that we can make it really easy for them to add their names to the petition. All of those things really help paint the broad picture that we need to get it done.
I would also urge, the weather is still good. Knock on your neighbors' doors, folks. If you're someone who does canvassing on other fronts, now is the time to do it, because you might be surprised. People that you think, oh, they'll support it, but they may not have gone to sign a signature anyway, because they don't know, they're not in the bubble all the time, and they're not in all these events. So I urge you, I did a walk through my neighborhood, and it was wonderful, other than folks saying, oh, I didn't know you still were alive, so it's good to connect with my neighbors and so on. In any
Cindy,
event,
people are also posting on Nextdoor in our coalition. A lot of folks have mentioned that as being a really great way to get the word out.
Excellent, Alexis, really excellent. We are coming close to time. It's a Sunday. I think people are probably ready to either enjoy cocktails or dinner. I want to thank Elisabeth, Jodi for an incredible presentation, Alexis, Janet for doing such great work and providing leadership, mobilizing us, inspiring us. And the League is so proud to stand with this campaign and for women's rights and reproductive rights. We are very grateful to every League member on this call, every non-League member on the call, and anyone who's joining us to just hear and show support. If you liked today's presentation, write a note in the chat to the panelists. They'd love to hear that they did a good job. And I know you all agree with me that they did a great job. I'm going to keep the meeting open to give you a chance to write some comments. Thank you all, and appreciate everybody's time on this Sunday evening. Good night, folks.